Well, thanks, Mark. Well, first, I just want to say it's an honor to be here talking to all of you this morning, and it's really great to see such a vibrant and dynamic group. I must say I was at last month. How many people were at last month's presentation? Yeah, it was great, and it was interesting because it impacted what I'm going to talk about today. I was really impressed with the positivity in the group, in the crowd, and just the energy. I think it's a really good sign of the health of the creative industry in Vancouver. However, I was a bit surprised that I didn't see many architects are there any architects here today, or graduate architects? So we have one, two, a couple, three. And it's interesting, I was having this conversation with Mark just in terms of, I'm not sure what that tells us, because, and perhaps it's a whole other talk. It'd be another talk just about maybe the siloization of creative communities. And so this is a very different group than what I'm used to speaking to. So it'll be interesting how you, if you're interested in hearing what I have to say. Anyways, last month Bob talked about fishing, and it was really great. It was really interesting. Now, architects. There we go. Architects have fish stories as well. Usually it comes down to Frank Gehry and his fish, and his propensity to design buildings like fish. But it was interesting listening to Bob, because what I realized was that what his message and mine are actually quite similar. And what I took from him was this notion that things aren't always what they appear, and you find creativity and you find things in unexpected places. And so really what I'm talking about is quite similar to that. So first of all, a little bit about me. I consider myself to be the luckiest person in the world, really. I get to design places like this. I get to work for communities and design public spaces and public buildings, community centers, aquatic centers. And it's a really, really rich and satisfying body of work to be working with communities and have such direct impact. So I get to do things like this and like this. And I get to design spaces that start out like this and end up like this. And it's a real honor to work with communities and to make an impact in our communities. Another thing about me is I really think I'm an optimist. I see a glass half full, and so I really do see a lot of potential and a lot of positive out of what I'll be talking about. So a little bit about what is motivating me and what is influencing our work at the moment. I'm going to go back and talk about the history of architecture. Some of you may have studied a little bit of architecture, but I do it a little bit quicker. My view is that the first architectural act was rolling stones together and creating a fire. At its essence, architecture is a social art. It's creating spaces where people come together, share stories, support each other, and build a community. And really every architectural act comes down to this simple issue for me. I think it reached its highest form in the Renaissance, and in spaces like this in Siena, where you get the public square, which is a truly the square is more important than the buildings. It's the space where people congregate. It's where they do commerce. It's where they have trials. It's where they celebrate. It is the living room of the community. And too often what we've become is we've given up our public space an ownership of our public space to the private sector. And the shopping mall has become the sort of pseudo-public space that has taken a lot of those roles. And yet it really is not a public space. Not everyone is welcome. You're welcome as long as you fit a certain set of rules and certain set of guidelines that are suitable to this type of space. So I think we need to get back to the former. I think we need to get back to creating spaces that are truly democratic and truly inclusive and allow for all areas of our communities. Another area of focus for I think a lot of us in our work is sustainability. And I'm actually not a big fan of the word sustainability, and I think a lot of people are losing interest in that as a term. And I'm much more of a fan of talking about resilience and how to find ways to make our communities more responsive to change and responsive to supporting one another. But using sustainability for the time being, it's often described as a three-legged stool. And really what that is a blending of environmental, economic, and social strategies that are really based around creating a more resilient community, both locally and globally. So from an architectural perspective, most work, and from planning and architectural perspective, most work deals with the environmental aspects of sustainability, and most of the energy that has gotten us to today. It touches on the economic and the social, but it's really focused on the environmental. And we have, in my world, a lot of ways that have given structure and helped educate and transform the market. And you may have heard of Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's certainly one of the most dominant building certification systems in North America and elsewhere. But there's others as well that really try to bring structure to the discussion. One of my particular interests in design is looking at the cross-pollination between design disciplines. And that's part of the reason why I made the comment earlier about the number of architects in the room, because I really believe that we have a lot to learn from each other, and there's a lot of things that are being explored and dealt with in different design disciplines that can inform our work. And one of the things that really got me thinking about this was we were doing the Whistler Library project, and I was introduced to a designer who's working north of Pemberton, and he's a designer that he designs clothing and gloves and backpacks and things for the sort of outdoor apparel industry. And we started this discussion, and it was really quite fascinating to see his process. He set up a shop in the woods north of Pemberton where he prototypes and where he experiments and where he's developing different ways of constructing garments. And I became quite fascinated by this because I saw a lot of architectural potential in this collaboration and these types of looking at different ways in different sectors. And so one of the things I did was I started attending conferences that weren't architectural conferences. And one of the ones I attended was the Design Currency, the Design Week event that was here in Vancouver a couple of years ago. Some of you may have attended that. It was really quite fascinating as sort of an outsider, squatting in a room full of communication designers and looking at and listening to what people were interested in, listening to what concerned people and what they were facing. And what struck me was that the language and the discussions, particularly around sustainability, were almost identical, yet the subject matter was completely different. And I think it just proved my point that we're all grappling with the same types of issues, but we're maybe too often doing them in silos. And that's why I think events like this are really wonderful to encourage greater cross-dialogue amongst design disciplines. But it was also important to me on another level. There was a really inspirational presentation by Cameron Sinclair, who's a part of Architecture for Humanity, and he gave a very inspirational talk about the power of design and the power of architecture to change and to make real differences to people. And so it was really inspirational on another number of levels. But after he spoke, there was a question, the typical question and answer period. And a fellow got up, and he was from India, and he asked a question, and he started the question by saying, and it's been a couple of years, I can't remember exactly what he said, but essentially what he said was, what I took from it was this: This is all fine, but I'm from India, and in India, what's facing us is an emerging middle class, and over the next 20 to 30 years, there'll be 500 million new automobiles entering into the system. And the room kind of went dead. It became this, and it was really staggering. It was a staggering statistic to be confronted with the scale of problems that others are dealing with, and you realize the luxury of the challenges that we're dealing with. But it really started me thinking about what that meant for us in our work. And this is a really simplistic analysis, so I'm warning you that, I'm telling you that in advance, but it is important. So one of the things we do is we do a lot of research around issues in sustainability, and so I had our researcher do some digging into this issue of the 500 million automobiles. I can't even barely say that. 500 million automobiles is just a staggering number of new vehicles. So we all know, Canada's a big country with a small population. India's got a 1.2 billion person population. Recently, CO2 emissions in megatons, they're about 3 times what we are. But per capita, we're 16.3 megatons per capita per year. They're 1.5. So we're about 10 times the emissions of India. And so when you start thinking about the change to the emerging middle class in countries like India, it really opens your eyes to a much broader problem. I don't want to pick on India because I think this really isn't about India, it's about us, but the story could be told about a number of different, but the example that was given to us in that session was India. So Canada's the nice little red sliver, about 2% of the world's emissions. India is about, it's the purple, it's about 5% currently. So we did some digging into this issue of the numbers of automobiles, and currently there's 30 million automobiles in Canada and about 72 million in India. And I haven't been able to find that 500 million automobile statistic. The World Bank estimates it's closer to a 200 million automobile increase over the next 30 years. So I've used that in my analysis, and it's still obviously a staggering number. You think we have 30 million and they will have 275 million by 2040. So, it really puts into context the challenge that they face, but also what we face as a result. So we did this really, again, simplistic analysis, but the long and the short of it is that if they're entering the system at a constant rate, it's essentially one new car entering the system every 5 seconds. Now, bringing it back to our context, we're really proud of our work and the work we've done around sustainable design, and there's a lot to celebrate. However, when we look at our greenhouse gas reductions, one of our recent LEED Gold projects saves 4.5 megajoules of CO2 per year, and this sounds very impressive, and took 4 years of hard work by a lot of people to achieve that level of success. But that the offset of that is every 8 minutes, that is offset by the new automobiles they're entering into the system in India. So basically, in the time I've been speaking, 4 years of efforts at reducing greenhouse gas emissions from one project have been offset. And so it really got us thinking when we look at this. Well, what does this mean for us? Obviously, what we're doing around sustainable design and the efforts we're putting are really significant, and we need to continue to do them. But for us, what it's really meant is that we really need to challenge some of the assumptions we've made around sustainable design and make sure we're actually having the most significant and greatest impact we can have on our communities. And with all due respects to Buckminster Fuller, we do not live in a bubble. And so what we do and what's done elsewhere, we're affected by. And, as an architect, we like to think that our buildings make a big difference, and they really do on lots of different levels. But the big challenge we face as a society is the transformation of the suburb. And the trophy buildings that we build and other people build in public buildings and central areas of cities like Vancouver are really meaningful in terms of setting new ways and learning different ways and helping to transform. But until we actually find a way to transform what 99% of the built fabric is in North America and elsewhere, we really aren't going to really deal with the issues. So, changing direction slightly, we're inundated with images and notions about sustainability, and it's really become sort of background noise of what, and we start to believe the rhetoric. We start to think insignificant things are significant, or at least give things greater meaning than perhaps we should. This has been an image I love to show because, really, the solution is not adding fancy technologies and different systems to buildings that are fundamentally unsustainable. We need to find ways to do things that are simpler and get down to fundamental principles. I refer to this as sort of a trinket architecture, and there's too much of that, frankly, that just simply adding a trinket to a building to call it sustainable is not in its necessarily sustainable on its own right. So we need to be more critical, all of us in our work, we need to be more critical about what we're saying, and we actually need to live up to the rhetoric that we're talking about when we're talking about sustainability. So some of the things, and as I said, we're confronted with these things every day. And I was recently in a hotel in Edmonton, and I went to have a shower in the morning, and this is what I was confronted with. I thought, like, this is real. Like, why could I possibly need 2 shower heads? To me, this truly is greenwashing. And this was what they told me before I hopped in the shower, that through the shower I could both refresh myself and restore our world. I thought, wow, isn't that great? Isn't that great? I turn off one of the shower heads and I can save the world. It just started my day beautifully. But these things are around us all the time. Actually, after I walked away from the last session and I had lunch and I sat down and I grabbed a napkin and it said, "Save the environment 1 napkin at a time." And I thought, well, this is great. So I took 2 because clearly 2 is better than 1. So we need to be more critical of some of these messages that we're given, and this is one of my particular peeves. I think we need to move beyond sort of preaching to people about how to be sustainable and actually move to solutions that are truly more helpful. So again, what does this mean for me and our work and my firm and our work? Well, our response to this and other issues is obviously well, maybe it's not obvious, but for us, we're continuing to pursue strategies and different ways of making our buildings as environmentally self-sufficient and with the least impact as possible. So we're continuing to push into the environmental aspect. But for us, the social sustainability side of things is the answer, and it's really becoming it's the area of research, it's the area of discussion that we believe as a firm we need to pursue a much more vigorous discussion around social sustainability. It was great to see how many people were willing to volunteer this morning, by the way, but I kind of wondered, what about everybody else? Anyways. So for us, we consider ourselves in the community building business. Our media is architecture and buildings, but we really look for every opportunity within what we do to help build a stronger community. It's interesting because obviously we're not the only ones that have come to this conclusion. I received this in my inbox the other day from Starbucks, and really what they're doing with this community building initiatives is really what I'm talking about. There's not a single word in this message around environment and around other sustainability aspects, but it's really about building community. And I think that's really great. I think we need to look for these opportunities of ways that we can build a stronger community. But again, back to creativity and what we do in our work. And this is by no means exhaustive, and for us it's an evolving effort. But we focus on the following things. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is social spaces. I call them the glue spaces. When we do a building, it's filled with program spaces, and there's a lot of effort going into making the rooms themselves as functional as possible. But too often there's not enough effort that goes into the spaces that hold them together. It's the spaces between the program spaces where community is built, and where people run into their neighbors, where they sit and read a book, where they have an argument, where they do all the things that are important in healthy communities. So we put a lot of effort into creating a variety of social spaces that support community interaction. We also believe and look for opportunities to create a diversity of spaces. One of the things that's really important to us is ensuring that, or looking for ways to send subtle messages to people about the diversity in a community. And there's lots of different ways that this can be done if you're looking for those opportunities. But really, you need to celebrate our differences, and you need to be exposed to them. And I think in our community facilities, it's a great place to be exposed to differences as well as commonalities. We need to create spaces that are truly democratic. And I mentioned earlier in the history of architecture that we've given up a lot of our democratic spaces to the private sector, and that's really sad. We need spaces where we can argue. We need spaces where we can celebrate. We need spaces where we can come together, where everyone in the community is welcome, regardless of age, race, ability, mental condition, you name it. Everyone needs to be welcome, and part of that is creating inclusive spaces. And I use this image from the Whistler Library because it's a great story. Whistler in itself is filled with contradictions, but the library is a really important social space in the community. And we have these wonderful study carols where people can read a book. But there's a homeless person in Whistler this fellow who used to live underneath the library, the old library. And, not sure of his full story, what sort of history, what's brought him to this place. But what I do know is that every day when the library opens, he comes in, sits down in a chair, has a nap, does whatever he does, basically uses the building as his home. He's welcome, and that's fine. And that is exactly what we need to see. We need to see these types of spaces where all are welcome. An important part of inclusivity is accessibility. And this is an area I could give a whole talk on accessibility as well. But this is my bank. I live in Deep Cove, and this is the Deep Cove Royal Bank. Unremarkable. It's like every bank that we all probably exist. And I've been using this branch for the last close to 20 years. And a few months ago, I was standing in line, and I was looking at the teller machines. I thought, that's really curious. One's got a little wheelchair sign above the teller machine. I thought, well, how come I haven't noticed that before? And I looked more carefully, and I realized that the only difference between these two teller machines is that one is set 2 inches lower than the other. And I'm sure it meets every code, and that's wonderful. But why don't we just set all of them 2 inches lower, and so make the entire community accessible? These are really simple principles. It's not that hard. Put them all lower, take the little sign off, and make everybody welcome. It's all about attitude. And I'll diverge for a second. As a young architect, I got involved in one of my first community projects in the Lower Mainland was a aquatic center in Langley. And I was really proud. I worked really hard. I put blood, sweat, and tears into this project, and we followed all the codes, and we got advice from all sorts of sources, particularly around sustainability or accessibility. And I remember shortly after the project opened, I received a letter. This was before email, and I received a letter from a mother who said, well, this is kind of an emotional story. She said, "This is great. I love the facility. It's wonderful on so many levels, but I can't bring my daughter." And she had a particular disability that made it that she couldn't use the facility. Now, at the time, I just had a daughter, and so it really hit me, and that's why it's emotional for me, because we thought we were doing everything we could. This was wonderful. We were making this community facility, and here it was, through simple action, we could have actually made it accessible for more. And so from that point forward, we've really tried to push far beyond the codes. So, enough of that. So we also need joy and beauty. We need spaces that inspire and that are experiential and that create these things that we feel proud of. We need spaces that are healthy, that don't pollute, that create environments where people don't make people sick. We also need spaces where we can celebrate, where we can come together as communities and really share joy. So I'm going to talk briefly about one of our recent projects. How am I doing for time? I'm close. Okay. Jasper Place Library is a project we're currently doing in Edmonton, and it's under construction, but it is a branch library, typical branch library program, but not a typical branch library form. And so this was interesting because the discussion we started with the library was about what is a library that has no books? Because we know that within the lifespan of this building, there won't be any books in this building. And this was really an interesting discussion because it really became about the social spaces. And so what we designed was a space where it's a large open space that is focused on the social spaces, and the collection really needs to have to adapt within it. And it also creates a very strong and bold and exciting, I think, dramatic form within the community. But the focus is on the social spaces because we know that's what will remain and that's what the community really needs. So, what inspires me? Norway inspires me. There's wonderful spaces. I think they have a really good attitude about public space. The new Opera House, I think, shows a really wonderful way of engaging the water. But I want to talk a little bit about the National Tourist Route program in Norway. Because here's where we've mixed design and social sustainability in a unique way. Norway is littered with these wonderful roads through desolate and beautiful landscapes. And they recognize the potential to create, to revitalize these roads through design and through architecture. And so they created competitions and different ways of experiencing them. And it has resulted in some truly wonderful design where people are really, their relationship with nature and is heightened. And so they've created all of these series of rest stops along these roads. And what it's done is it's created community, it's created economy. Hotels have sprung up. Old hotels now have business. Communities that were bypassed by tunnels now have business. And it really is a really wonderful way of connecting with nature. It's resulted in some tremendous design. This is a reindeer viewing gallery in northern Norway by Snøhetta that has recently received quite a bit of press. And it really is wonderful type of space. Another recent project for a viewing gallery on the side of a waterfall. And so you can see the power of design to actually change the way we understand a landscape. And when you contrast this to the discussion that we've had recently in Canada about the viewing platform that's been proposed in Jasper Park, you really see that they have a much more mature understanding of their relationship with nature than we do, and we could really learn a lot from Norway. Almost done. Final question. What can you do to help build a stronger community? As I think ultimately we all have a responsibility, and it's really what's going to make us resilient in the face of change, in the face of things that we can't control. We need to do it in our personal lives, but we really need to do it in our professional lives and in our work, because that's where we really can have a very, very significant impact. Oh, oh, thank you.
We're a few minutes behind schedule, so let's get going with this. Darryl, if Darryl could join me back on stage, we're going to hammer him with the hard stuff. Peace, man. Peace out. I'll start with a question. You talk about community and sustainability and how those are actually more connected than many have realized in the past. Why hasn't community been better, more a part of that process, and what can we do about it now? Like, how do you get that aspect, how that message up to the powers that be and make this a part of the process?
Well, it's a really good question. I think part of the reason is it's really hard to measure. We focused on the things that we can meter or we can test. How do you measure the level of social engagement in a community and your impact on it? They're longer term, they're harder to quantify, and so I think for a lot of good reasons, I think the focus has been on the things that are easier to quantify, and I think what we really need to do is research around the things that are more difficult. So I think we've an often used term in sustainability is low-hanging fruit. I think we're getting good at the low-hanging fruit. Now we need to really push ourselves and challenge ourselves at the things that are harder to quantify and harder to understand.
Do you? Creative Mornings alumni, Gagan Diesh.
Stand up. Very tight jeans. My question actually was around the slide that you had around diversity. How do you see architecture promoting diversity?
I'm glad you asked that. That's a great question because it's not immediately apparent how you can. But I think that the more we're exposed to different, I do a lot of community centers. So in my context, what I can do is make sure people are aware of the diversity of activities that are taking place, and leave it up to the people programming the facilities to allow for the spectrum of the community to exist. But if you're exposed to it, I believe that just simply being exposed to it and seeing it makes you more tolerant of it, makes you more understanding of it. So it's a subtle thing, it's a small thing, and it's obviously not going to lead to fundamental change, but we should be doing it. Because I think every small little thing makes a difference. So making sure when we're designing them as well that we're talking to the widest range of the community, so that we're understanding if there are, different programmatic needs or different social needs or different cultural needs that we can incorporate into the work. So there's actually, when you actually start to dig into it, there's actually quite a few things that we do at a detail level that can just support greater diversity. Yeah. Oh, sorry. You're in charge.
When designing for projects, you're talking about physical inclusion. What about social inclusion? So when you're designing a space, what are you doing to include sort of all the social aspects that are, transgender, for example, just including sort of that sort of inclusion in the community?
Well, it depends on the building type and what we're doing, but like I said, in the context of community facilities and community centers and community recreation type facilities that I do a lot of it comes down to the attitude of the operator and the philosophy. So we can set the table for making sure that the infrastructure is there to allow for people to be dealt with in a dignified way. And so, using your example, it's maybe a simple response, but if we have, we use a concept called, in our aquatic facilities, for instance, we call universal change facilities, where we focus less on gender-specific changing and really much more about what people are asking for, which is privacy. And so we call them universal change rooms because they can accommodate anyone, right? And everyone equally. And that's subtle but really, really important. But there's lots of different examples. It's just keeping your mind open to the fact that accessibility is an easy one because a lot of it is quantifiable. But we get these charts and templates about what a disabled person's needs are, and they're in a wheelchair and their arm reaches this far, and that's all great. But that's what 5% of disabled people. So what about everybody else? So it's really. I think for us, it's about having the attitude that we're not looking at people as sort of in a narrow way, and making sure we're open to as many different inputs and influences as we can in our work.
Hi, I got a microphone. I'm Hillary. Mark asked me to introduce myself. I've been one of the organizers here for Creative Mornings. This is my last month on that. And thank you so much for your talk. We had a really great group discussion that focused around this sort of idea of like how we use spaces public, like as a community. And for me, like I am a cyclist. I'm a big walker. I'm very much about like personal accountability and about like if I want a city that's going to serve me and spaces that serve me, I have to take it. I have to create that. And I have to talk to people and make sure they understand what it is that I'm looking for, just as much as everybody else's responsibility to do the same. So I'm wondering, like, what is a space in Vancouver that you see that perhaps is like, when you go by it, you're like, oh, I would totally do this to this space, and how can we do that? How can we reclaim a private space and make it our own?
Wow. Where do I start? Well, there's lots of spaces that I'd love to get my hands on, but you know what? I'm not sure if it's going to directly answer your question, but I want to talk about it anyways, because I think it does get to your point. I think it's our relationship to the water, and it's we're so proud of the seawall and 40 kilometers of the same thing. And what's wrong with touching the water? What's wrong with having spaces or buildings that actually cross the other side? Because the seawall is about moving. It's not about being, right? So we've actually created a barrier to touch the water, engage with the water. And I think we need more public space opportunities that change our relationship with the water. I showed the slide of the Opera House in Norway. And I find it, it's an incredible public space. And if you ever have an opportunity to visit it, it's one of the most incredible public spaces I've ever experienced. It was built around the same time as our convention center. And again, I don't want to pick on our convention center. I think there's lots of wonderful things about it. But it just demonstrates a very, very different approach and belief around what our relationship is to nature and to the water. And there, the building actually dives into the water, and the building is a public space. We give our convention center is about landscape. It's about nature. It's about the green roof, and we're separated from the water. They're both tidal. They're both built on stilts in the water. Yet one creates a really direct relationship with the environment. That's completely unrelated to the program, and it was a missed opportunity, I think, with a project like that. And so I think what it really just demonstrates is that we have this obsession, with every last tree and with every bit of nature, but we don't have enough hard surface public spaces where we can gather, where we can, the best thing we have is in front of the art gallery, and it's bark mulch, so when there's demonstrations, it doesn't affect the grass. Well, we need spaces like that. We don't have enough of them. We give too many of our public spaces over to green, and we're surrounded by it. We need more hard surface. We need more people spaces as well.
Trying to go around the room. If there's a lot of people, I know everybody's caught my eye, but I'm trying to circulate, so I'm going to go back there.
Okay. Hi. Wanted to get your feedback on the recent discussions in Vancouver about the Georgia Viaduct and whether it should be ripped down or do you see a potential for turning that into a usable green space, biking, walking, that sort of thing?
Well, that's a really important question, and I think it's one of the really important urban questions facing our city right now. So I have to, first of all, admit that I don't have a very well-informed opinion. I haven't studied it. I haven't looked at the implications of tearing them down. So it's more of a gut reaction, and I guess in my mind, there's no question it's a barrier, and that it should be taken down. I think that we benefit more from stitching together the community in a more significant way. But like I said, I don't know the implications of that. One of the things you hear about quite often, and there's so much talk about the Highline Park in New York, which is a wonderful but unique situation, and I don't really buy that it could be that for us. I don't think the conditions are necessarily the same. So I'd rather remove it than transform it, because as long as it's there, it'll always be a barrier, and the spaces underneath are really inhuman, and so I'd rather have human spaces on the ground that stitch together a whole bunch of community than I would in having human spaces up in the air. So, like I said, not very well informed, but that's just my own personal view right now on that issue.
Some controversy. You all tweeting that? Darryl Condon says, "Tear that sucker down." Mo Daliwa.
Hi. My question is, I guess, a little bit about culture, because a number of your slides touched on that. One of my colleagues is from South Africa, and I mean, you get a couple of beers into him, and he's always rallying against the city that you can't drink in public spaces here. So a number of your slides showed some public spaces in Europe and elsewhere where you have this opportunity, this public space that's really, I think, has incredible potential to affect the culture of a space. But in Vancouver, I think there's some specific challenges around the culture of the city affecting the architecture. So how do you get around that?
Also another really good question. I'm not sure it's my area of expertise, but I do have an opinion. I think we are overregulated. I think that we don't have enough, we don't give ourselves enough, we don't trust ourselves enough, and we haven't really, no, it's changing. I've lived in Vancouver since 1993, so almost 20 years. And there's been a huge change in the sort of energy on the street and the street culture. So I think everything's heading in the right direction, but I don't think that we're nearly where we need to be. We need to be open to taking. I mean, I hate to say it when a year after, I think we all showed we weren't really able to be very responsible in our public spaces. But so with a bit of irony, I guess, suggests that we need to take more risks, and we need to, just touching on that, I think it's so sad. Here was, when it was positive, the life on the street around Vancouver last spring was fantastic, and we experienced that during the Olympics as well. And it would be such a shame if, in response to what happened, that we would not not trust ourselves enough to use our public spaces in our outdoor realm to live, and that does concern me. It concerns me that we would be moving away from that. So I'm not sure if that directly answers your question or not, but I'm not an expert on liquor regulations or bylaws, but we need to do more. We need to occupy our public spaces. We need to live in them. We need to we need to find lots of different ways to bring life and interact, because ultimately that's what builds community. And for me, it always comes back to building a stronger community. And if we're all shut in our doors and tweeting away and doing whatever we do, it's interesting, the library project that I touched on, and I could talk at length some of that. But one of the really interesting things about the library is that, in spite of the fact that they're becoming less about the collections, their usage is actually increasing generally. And there's all kinds of theories about it, but for me, what it points out is that, you know, the social role, the social needs of the community aren't being well met. In the library, for instance, when you focus on the public space and the social spaces, is an ideal place for that. But our outdoor spaces should be as well.
Nobody asked me my opinion, but I would add that the affordability, one of the cultural side effects of the affordability crisis we're having in our city is that we're ending up a city that's only half occupied, first of all, and the culture creators who require affordable housing, those real neighborhoods made up of people like us, we're running out of those neighborhoods, and we're going to end up a city filled with douchebags, and that's going to end up being our culture. And you know, drinking in public, if it's a bunch of douchebags, it's not going to work, right? Anyway, one day I'll be a speaker. I don't know.
Well, again, I'm not sure it's. I just want to comment briefly on that. Again, maybe not my area of expertise, but I mentioned the transformation of the suburbs, and you know, there's so many things to celebrate about how we've transformed downtown Vancouver in particular, and so many good things. But until we open our minds to transforming the rest of the city and the rest of the cities that surround the city, we're going to have this challenge. I mean, we've pushed out all of the affordable housing. We're not willing to replace it, and we, as a community, we need to decide to open ourselves up to living a little bit differently, and ultimately to be living better. But people are afraid of that. They're afraid of the change. They don't know the possibilities, and so we get into these sort of NIMBYism issues, and you know, we all need to be advocates. We all need to be promoting positive change. That's how I think we're going to deal with those issues.
Okay, so you actually kind of just answered my question. About change. I'm Bob. I spoke at last month's Creative Mornings. So I just recently moved into a LEED building, and you know, our landlord told us, you know, you don't have absolute control over the heat. You just have like 2 degrees warmer than outside or 2 degrees colder than outside, and that's a compromise that we have to make. You know, we can't choose to have it 80 degrees in our house because that's how we save energy, right? And I just kind of wanted to know your feelings about if there's a way to make it easier for the residents of neighborhoods to absorb density, and you know, specifically about what you just talked about perceived NIMBYism in our neighborhoods. Like, is there a way to inform or to I don't know. Is that a question? Does that make sense? Like, how do we bridge that gap where there aren't people saying, hey, there shouldn't be a high-rise in Mount Pleasant. Hey, there should be a high-rise in Mount Pleasant. You know, is there a answer to that?
I think if there was an easy answer to that.
You're talking about rise, aren't you?
Yeah.
You dirty bastard.
I think if there was an easy answer to that, I don't know. Maybe I'd be speaking to a larger group. I don't know. That's a difficult issue because I've been talking a lot today about democracy and the need to celebrate our differences, the need to argue, and the need to come to healthy resolution. So it's not that I don't understand or sympathetic to a diversity of viewpoints, but I don't know. I don't know how we overcome fear of change, because the one certainty is change, and it's a cliche, but it is so true. You know, unless we actually, you know, I live in North Vancouver, and District of North Vancouver, several years ago, there was a decision by the community that we didn't want to flood, you know, to move up the mountains and fill it with single-family homes and to stop growth. And that was a really well-intentioned thing. I mean, nobody wants. I don't think we need to, you know, cut down any more trees on our local mountains and build single-family houses. But the unintended consequences of that is that change happened, but it wasn't a change that we were in control of. And now what we see is that with no housing options, the demographic changes that are a result of that is that there's no families, there's no young kids, and the schools are closing. And so now you get into arguments in the community about, well, we don't want our schools to close, but we're not willing to make the changes to our community that would actually set up the fundamental conditions where schools would stay open. because our discussions are so emotional and they're so fragmented, and we don't make linkages between a decision here that affects another aspect of our community. So we need to find a way to have more balanced and more comprehensive discussions, and instead of just responding emotionally to issues, to actually understand. And it's difficult. I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I don't know how we do that. But I know that the more people that are out there advocating for positive change and for more constructive discussion in communities, the better off I think we'll be in terms of reaching that.
We are literally out of time, so I want to ask you guys a question. Do we stop now, or do you want to do a couple more questions? Are you okay with another 5 minutes, 10 minutes? I need to know, because if you need to go, my contract with you people is that 10 o'clock you go home. It's now 10 o'clock. So if anybody has to leave, please feel free to get to work. Let's do 2 more questions and then wrap up and go, shall we? Because I like this. Okay, there's someone who works in architecture. Maybe he's got a smart question.
That's a lot to live up to. I'm not an architect, so bear with me here. But the comments around engagement and the traditional method to get a community to understand what's happening is to do flyers and advertisements and then have a 4 o'clock meeting at City Hall where you get 50 people to show up, and whoever gets the mic is usually the unhappiest person in the room. Not in this case, of course. So what's your opinion on how things are going to move to the online space and engage things like social media, where bigger, faster dialogues can happen and actually create a much more interesting, richer discussion where you can create those linkages between the complete view of the issue, where there's situations happening over here and they're not connected, because I still see that movement kind of old school. So do you see that transitioning happening? And what's your opinion on the effectiveness of moving online with some good discussions around community development?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's been lots of really interesting things happening around looking at different ways to consult, particularly around an architectural project. We're doing it, others are doing it, looking at using social media as a way of getting a word out and getting information back in. And I think we're really in the infancy of understanding the power of that. And I think we haven't made all the mistakes yet. We haven't, we're just learning how best to get maximum impact from that. It's really quite interesting when our projects now, we'll set up a Facebook page and a Twitter account, and we'll, you name it, and we'll look at ways of getting information out. And it's quite fascinating for us to see the types of responses we get. And so I think it's going to be increasingly important way of getting information out. And then I think we need to start understanding how to filter that information, how to understand it. For years we've built public buildings through consultation, and we go out to public open house and we see people face to face, and you understand where the comment's coming from. You understand if the room's been filled by one point of view, because we really try to make sure in our, and I think most architects do, is that you don't just listen to one voice, you listen to as many. And one of the things we're learning about social media is that it's faceless, right? And so you don't know if the response is all coming from a special interest or particular group. We're doing a pool in Surrey at the moment, and so we've got we did a parallel public open house and a parallel online survey, and it was really interesting to follow the numbers and to look at how the responses came back in, both the timing and the quantity. And we had far more comments back online than we did in public, which was interesting. But we could also start seeing trends in terms of the demographic and special interest groups that would hit it at certain times. And you could surmise that somebody's, sending a group email to everybody, and we're getting flooded with a particular point of view. But then it became really interesting to study the in-person consultation and the online consultation and see where the differences were and where the similarities were. And some of the things surprised us. So I think it's going to become increasingly important, and I think we're all going to get better at understanding and interpreting the data.
Who's willing to guarantee me that it is smoking awesome? You're on the committee, so I'm pulling, you're disqualified. I see a hand back here. You're swearing to me. You're giving me the eyeballs like it's so good, right? Aaron, you're out. Is it a good one? Okay, so here's the deal I'm going to make with all of you guys. Everybody, I think this is a super important conversation. If I was Jon Stewart, it would be that moment in the show, on the Daily Show, where I'd say, can you stick around? We'll talk about it and then we'll put it on the web. So what I'd like to do is, I'm going to let Aaron ask one last question because he's a special guest. He's come a long way. Everybody else that has a question, email it to vancouver@creativemornings.com and we will get them answered. Deal? We'll answer them?
Maybe not by the end of the day, but
Maybe not today. And we'll publish them on the blog. Publish them on the blog as a supplemental. Is that kind of cool? I just came up with that myself. Is that okay? Okay. Aaron.
Hi, my name is Aaron James Drappel. I'm a graphic designer, and Mark made me ask this question, so I'm nervous talking in front of people. But do you guys have a typographer on staff? Because, you know, where I'm from in northern Michigan, you know, they build these big wild-ass things, and you go there, and it's hard to find the entrance, and it's cool, and there are these big wild forms and all that stuff, and then the last step, the icing on the cake, was just bad typography that's going to last for 25 years. So why do architects think they're typographers? And thank you.
That is not the question I thought he was going to ask.
well, it's a great question.
Don't do it, Darryl.
No,
Don't say it.
I agree with you, by the way. I think too many architects think they're typographers and graphic designers and other things, and I think it gets back to one of my earlier comments is that we need more cross-pollination and more discussion amongst design disciplines. And I think we'd all, but you know what? I could make the same question is because I've been in rooms full of other design disciplines and everybody's an architect as well. And I think we need to understand each other's areas of expertise better and support one another because ultimately we all benefit from promoting a stronger design culture across the board.
Sorry, I just realized I forgot my thank you card for Darryl. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stick with me for 2 seconds.